lot of the different methods that we employ can lead to different kinds of biases that can emerge, and kind of one of those biases is just kind of in the basic carrying out of a regular survey, where you give a respondent certain options to choose, like that in effect is kind of leading them in a number of certain directions, more or less. And honestly, one of the best ways that you can truly measure what someone is thinking about is really just asking them to put that in their own words. And for the entire year, we were asking about 2,000 Americans each week questions. This question, just to say, in your own words, what is your biggest concern about the 2020 U.S. election? And over the course of the year, we were able to ask this question to more than 70,000 Americans. And that really just gave us kind of an interesting insight into what is driving voters' decisions at the ballot box, but also what are their main concerns just when it comes to the actual mechanics of voting. At the beginning of the year, we found that the economy was kind of the top concern for voters heading into the election, but it was a very, very eventful year. Obviously, the coronavirus pandemic is one of the biggest stories of the century so far, and I don't think we'd expect that to fall by the wayside too much as time goes on. Although who knows what can happen. But we certainly saw a large uptick in the share of responses that cited concern over COVID as their top concern heading into the election. I think one interesting thing that I'd note about this survey, which something that we didn't necessarily foresee at the beginning of the year, was how our wording of framing it as a concern when you're thinking about your vote, that kind of ended up taking on a broader meaning than we necessarily anticipated, where the actual mechanics of how someone would vote became a huge aspect of the conversation. Mail-in balloting became the norm in this cycle, and I think as the year, if you look back through the responses as the year goes on, just the increasing share of voters who were most concerned about contracting the virus as they were trying to vote was certainly a very, very striking part. But the other thing that really stood out, and I think is emblematic of pretty much just President Trump's imprint on the nation and on the political conversation, is just the steep rise in kind of partisan responses and justifications that people gave for their vote. Just very blatantly saying either, my concern is getting Donald Trump out of office. My concern is keeping the, socialist Democrats out of the White House. Just sort of kind of nakedly partisan justifications that, when given a blank space to respond, people just immediately stepped right into. So, I think there were questions in the Republican Party on the back of the 2018 midterms of, just how much 2020 was going to be a referendum on the president, and just how much of it was going to be kind of a choice, like the 2016 election ended up. And I really think if you're looking at these numbers from the very beginning of the year, when the Democrats had yet to nominate a candidate, the fact that the economy was the top issue, I think, kind of gives you some indication that maybe we were looking at some type of a choice election. Obviously, Joe Biden's clinching of the Democratic nomination kind of ended up taking the focus off of the Democratic candidate in a lot of ways. Also coronavirus had a big impact there as well, pulling both candidates off the campaign trail for a long time, but specifically Biden, who kind of made this strategic choice to kind of try to message and model responsible pandemic behavior. And as a result, he was not in the spotlight very much. And, that's something that that is a constant with President Trump. And I think in the end, the election ended up being more of a referendum. I think, that ended up being maybe more positive for the president than a lot of people anticipated. I think some were surprised by the increase in votes the president was able to find in the country, and just the way that his kind of base first enthusiasm approach really did work to a large extent. But ultimately, and I think our responses showed this, was that largely people who are thinking most about the president going into November 3rd were more likely to have a strongly negative view of him than they were to have a strongly positive view of him. Two things that you saw really grow more and more dominant in the conversation were both COVID-19 and concerns that people had about voting, and concerns that people had about potential election fraud. And I think really just given the conversation that you see happening right now, and efforts by the Trump campaign to kind of wage a kind of public relations effort that the vote has been stolen from them. I think what our responses show is that kind of the president's early messaging effort on this that started really back in March and April took hold relatively early, specifically among the Republican base. And you can see, you can kind of track throughout the year how that kind of continued to build into a crescendo right ahead of Election Day. And, that has huge implications, not just for the transition, but also, for like the pillars of the Democratic project in general. The democracy works because, actors on all sides of the partisan aisle decide and act in good faith that, elections are decided by the voters, and, that when that process plays out, we respect those outcomes and those consequences. And essentially what you're seeing now, about our polling showed that about 85% of Republicans expected Donald Trump to win the election, and we've seen the share of Republicans who say that they have little or no faith in the U.S. elections system double since Election Day, and most Republicans saying the election was decided neither freely nor fairly. That is going to set the tone probably for much of the Biden presidency if you don't see a lot of these Republican elected members of office kind of come out and use some elite messaging to kind of just take down the temperature and turn the page to the next the next era of government here in Washington.